Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Give Us Bad Boys and Billionaires short story collection by L.M. Mountford, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Falling for my son's best friend. Prologue. Watching her son drive down the road, Elizabeth Clark sighed heavily. Today should have been one of the happiest days of her life. He'd done it after 5 years, 5 long years of waiting, procrastination, and disappointment. He'd finally done it. Victor, her sweet baby boy, was finally moving out and going to university. It hadn't been easy. He'd done abysmally in his GCSEs, barely scraping a passing grade. So he'd taken a break to work and save some money before going out and blowing it under the guise of traveling. He wanted to find himself, he told her, see the world. And he had, from what she could gather. He'd seen the world, one club at a time. She doubted she'd ever known what he'd gotten up to out there, and she didn't want to. He hadn't written or called, just turned up on the doorstep, and then a few days later enrolled in the city college for various courses. He'd worked hard, got his head down, studied, and finally, he had done it. She should have been ecstatic, proud, and practically bouncing off the walls. What mother wouldn't be? Yet, all Elizabeth felt was a sense of abandonment. He was going, leaving her all alone with him. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze whispering through her long raven hair. When the car turned around the street's bend, time seemed to hold its breath, and Elizabeth wanted so badly to bend the walls of space and time around that moment, that last glimpse of her son, and stretch it on for an eternity. Then he was gone, and who knew when she would see him again? Of course, deep down, she knew she was being silly. Oxford wasn't exactly Beirut. Victor was just a few hours' drive away, close enough that he could come home for every Sunday roast and go back after. That bitter pill drove her back indoors. Desperate to keep busy, she set about doing one job that had always proved a source of comfort to her: cleaning. There was usually so much she needed to do, so many jobs that had to be done. A household of a young adult male was one that never stayed clean and required constant attention. Unfortunately, there was now a very vital part of that equation which was no longer prevalent in her life, without which it no longer felt like home. Without Victor, it was just another immaculate showroom, a haunted residence for a lingering spirit, the ghost of a neat and impeccable mother, and the base camp of her traveling salesman husband. Elizabeth furrowed her brow with disgust as she looked upon the neat pile of stacked plates and dishes in her cupboard, laundry ironed and folded away, and practically sparkling wood worktops. Then she felt her stomach tighten. How could it be? Was there something she had forgotten? No, that couldn't be it. She'd followed the same routine she'd always done, and yet somehow she had finished 5 hours worth of work in less than half an hour. With a dispirited sigh, she walked across her now impeccably clean kitchen and fell into one of her dining table chairs. Resting her head in her hands, she tried to think of something, anything to do. God, how had her life come to this? Patrick. He was why. That bastard had always been the source of her misery. In school, she had always been outgoing, adventurous, the popular girl, always doing something, be it tennis training or dance class, going out with friends, or babysitting the neighborhood's kids, anything that would get her out of the house. Then Patrick had entered her life, and less than 5 months after her 18th birthday, they were married. He had been so handsome then. They'd made a lovely photo couple. The strapping rugby captain, all muscle and easy smiles, with the leggy athletic beauty on his arm flowing in flowing white lace. The gown had been a work of art. It took a lot of looking in the photos to see the bump, the memento of a night she could only remember as an alcoholic haze, but that would completely reshape her life. It had been a small ceremony for family and friends. Then he'd promptly whisked her across to the small house his parents had bought for them on the other side of the county, near where Somerset met Devonshire, in one of the areas of many sleepy little villages, ideally located for his new role in the family business, but far away from her family and friends. So she'd become a mother and a housewife, the iconic role reversal from party girl and athlete to a domestic goddess, and she'd reveled in it. The challenge of being a new mother, the thrill of bringing life into the world. For Patrick, however, the switch had come as a nasty shock. The walking, talking definition of a good time Charlie, his family had set him up in a role he'd been born to, salesman for their peat factory. And if the idea of going from garden center to garden center, sweet talking them into buying his family products, hadn't quite lived up to the fast talking rugby star's dreams of adult life, then he certainly hadn't bargained on all of his hard work going to support his wife and child, or that he'd have to keep it in his pants. She gave a dry laugh at that notion before her eyes suddenly lit up. Jennifer. Chapter 1. Years ago, the road had been a quiet, snaking stretch of tarmac, but back in 1993, work had begun on a site that would become one of the UK's largest shopping outlet villages. In less than a year, Clark's Village had transformed the 839 into a bustling thoroughfare that during rush hour could be lined with bumper-to-bumper congestion. At 10 in the morning, however, when all the rest of the world was being swept up in the ebb and flow of everyday life, there was very little in the way of traffic. Sleek and polished to a high shine, the electric blue Audi TT convertible sped along the snaking stretch of single-lane tarmac. Heedless of the rain pelting the windscreen, Elizabeth kept her foot on the floor, relishing in the sweet rush of adrenaline as she sped through the numerous villages dotting the 839. She loved driving. Fast driving was like great sex. It was freedom, a complete surrender to the moment. Behind the wheel, she forgot the disappointments, forgot the broken dreams, her sham of a marriage. She forgot all the downward slopes her life had taken. There was only the road, the rush, and the sexy throb of the engine purring through her. It was her escape. There was no warning for the turning, just a sudden gaping maw in the surrounding woodland as the tarmac branched off. Used to the turn, Elizabeth dropped a gear and dragged the wheel around, adding just a dab of the brakes as the TT swung gracefully around the hairpin, then corrected for the straight and sped on. It was a reckless maneuver, stupid even in the rain, along such a treacherous blind turn, but the momentary stomach-flipping rush made the risks seem rather insignificant. Of course, she'd never had much to worry about in her Audi. The TT responded to her every command like the fine German-engineered automobile it was, which was good because off of the A39, the way became a snaking lane of old tarmac and blind turns, behind any number of which could await the hulk of an oncoming tractor or bus. She floored it, and the Audi turned from a purring kitten to a raging tiger. It roared and kept roaring until she pulled into the familiar L-shaped driveway of Forbidden Fruit Cottage. Despite its name, Forbidden Fruit Cottage was, in fact, a bungalow. A stately bungalow, though, with numerous extensions and surrounded by 3 acres of private land. It also happened to be the only property within 2 miles. Heedless of the rain, Elizabeth got out of the sports car and sauntered up to the front door. Overhead, the sky was dark and subdued, the sun blotted out by the canopy of thick gray clouds. The rain, that had been a mere trickle when she set off, fell in a continuous sheet that drenched her from head to toe in the few strides to the front step. Too aware of the icy rivulets running down the back of her neck, she raised a hand to knock, only for the door of heavy English oak, painted a deep blue with a plaque stamped forbidden fruit, to suddenly swing inward. Elizabeth felt her breath catch. Oh my.